The explosion lit up Grant Mitchell's cornfield like someone had thrown a second sun into the Kansas sky. He was walking back from the barn, wiping grease off his hands with an old rag, when the fireball came screaming overhead. It was so low he could feel the heat on his face, so bright it turned night into day for 3 seconds. Then it slammed into his back 40 with a sound like the world cracking open. Grant's first thought was meteor. His second thought was that his insurance company was going to laugh him off the phone. His third thought died in his throat when he reached the crater and saw what was inside. It definitely wasn't a meteor. The ship was half buried in scorched earth, its hull twisted and smoking. But it wasn't the twisted metal from any plane he'd ever seen. The surface shimmered, catching moonlight and throwing back colors he didn't have names for. Purple that wasn't quite purple. Silver that moved like liquid. The smoke rising from it smelled wrong too, like burning copper mixed with something sweet, almost like honey. Then he saw her, and his brain just stopped working for a second. She was sprawled halfway out of a busted hatch, one arm reaching toward the ground like she'd been trying to crawl away. Her skin was pale blue, the color of sky just before sunrise. Her hair was long and deep purple, spread across the dirt like spilled ink. And there was blood. At least, he thought it was blood. It was silver, catching the moonlight as it dripped from a nasty gash on her forehead. Grant slid down into the crater, his boots scrabbling on loose dirt. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. Real aliens. An actual alien. On his farm. This was impossible. This was insane. This was happening anyway. He reached her side and knelt down carefully. She was breathing, at least. He could see her chest rising and falling, though it was shallow and uneven. Up close, he could see more details that his brain struggled to process. Her skin had a faint shimmer to it, like someone had dusted her with pearl powder. Her eyelashes were long and dark, almost black against that blue skin. "Hey," he called out, keeping his voice steady even though nothing about this situation was steady. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes snapped open and Grant nearly fell backward. They were gold. Not brown with gold flecks or hazel that looked gold in certain light. Actually, genuinely gold, like somebody had taken 2 coins fresh from the mint and put them in her face. They locked onto him with an intensity that made his stomach flip. She tried to sit up immediately, her face twisting with pain. She got about halfway before her strength gave out and she collapsed back with a grunt that sounded way too human for someone who looked like she'd walked out of a sci-fi movie. "Don't touch me," she managed, her English accented but clear. Every word sounded like it cost her something. "I'm fine. I just need to." She tried again to stand, pushing herself up with shaking arms. Her left leg buckled the second she put weight on it. Grant caught her before she could hit the ground again. She was lighter than he expected, like her bones were hollow or made of something less dense than his. "Yeah, you look real fine," he said, adjusting his grip so he wasn't pressing on any obvious injuries. "Come on. My workshop's not far. Let's get you patched up." "I said don't," she started, trying to pull away, but she didn't have the strength. Her protests got weaker with every step he took. "I heard what you said," Grant replied, starting the careful climb out of the crater. "I'm doing it anyway. You can complain about it after you're not bleeding silver all over my cornfield." She went quiet after that. Too quiet. By the time he reached the workshop behind his house, her head had lolled against his shoulder and her breathing had gone even more shallow. The workshop was exactly what it sounded like, a converted garage where he fixed tractors and cars and anything else mechanical that people brought him. It smelled like motor oil and metal and old coffee. He laid her carefully on the old couch he kept in the corner for lunch breaks. The cushions were worn and probably covered in more grease than fabric at this point, but it was softer than the floor. Under the fluorescent lights, he got his first really good look at her injuries. The cut on her forehead was deep, still seeping that weird silver blood. There were burns on her arms, blistering the blue skin. Her flight suit, because that's what it had to be, some kind of uniform, was torn in several places, showing more injuries underneath. Grant grabbed his first aid kit from the shelf, the same one he used when he cut himself working on engines. His hands were shaking as he opened it. He had no idea if human medicine would work on aliens. He had no idea if he was about to make things worse. But doing nothing definitely wasn't an option. He cleaned the cuts as carefully as he could, using antiseptic that made the silver blood fizz slightly. She didn't wake up, which was probably a mercy. He wrapped gauze around the worst of the wounds, working by instinct more than knowledge. The silver blood was already clotting, turning darker, almost gray at the edges. "Dad." A small voice from the doorway made him jump so hard he nearly dropped the gauze roll. His daughter Lily stood there in her pink pajamas with the unicorns on them, clutching Mr. Trunk, the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 3. She was 7 now, with blonde hair that stuck up in about 15 directions because she'd been sleeping, and blue eyes that were currently the size of dinner plates. "Is that an alien?" Lily whispered, like speaking too loud might make the situation more real. Grant took a breath, trying to figure out how to explain this when he couldn't explain it to himself. "Yeah, sweetie. I think so." Lily's eyes somehow got even wider. She stepped into the workshop, Mr. Trunk dangling from one hand. "Is she nice?" "Don't know yet, baby. But she's hurt bad, so we're going to help her. That's what we do, right? We help people who need it." Lily nodded seriously, like he just explained something very important about how the world worked. "Can I help?" "Not right now. I need you to go back to bed, okay? We'll talk about all this in the morning." "And Lily?" He waited until she looked at him. "Don't tell anyone about this yet. Not your friends, not their parents. Nobody. Can you do that for me?" "I promise, Dad." She hugged Mr. Trunk tighter. "Is she going to be okay?" "I hope so, kiddo. I really hope so." After Lily left, Grant stood there for a moment, just staring at the unconscious alien woman on his couch. Then he looked at the crashed ship in his field, visible through the workshop's open door. His brain was screaming at him that this was crazy, that he should call someone, that this was way above his pay grade. But who would he call? The government? They'd probably dissect her. The news? They'd turn his farm into a circus. So instead, he did what he always did when faced with something broken. He decided to fix it. He grabbed his toolbox and a flashlight and headed back to the crater. The ship was still smoking, still radiating heat. Up close, it was even more impressive and terrifying. The hull wasn't riveted or welded. It looked grown, like the whole thing had been shaped from a single piece of material. There were no seams, no joints, just smooth curves that hurt his eyes if he looked at them too long. But underneath all that impossible alien technology, he started to see patterns. There were conduits running along what had to be the frame. Power cells that glowed faintly even damaged. Access panels that opened when he found the right pressure points. It was like looking at an engine from a future he'd never lived to see, but an engine nonetheless. Grant had been a mechanic for 15 years. He'd started working on his dad's tractors when he was 10, had taken apart and rebuilt his first car engine at 14. He knew machines. He knew how they breathed, how they moved, how they thought. This ship was different, sure. The technology was beyond anything Earth had. But engines were engines. They needed fuel, power, exhaust. They needed parts that worked together in harmony. He started documenting everything with his phone, taking pictures and videos. Then he started carefully probing connections, tracing power flows, identifying what was broken and what was just offline. A fuel coupling was cracked. A stabilizer was completely melted. Something that looked like a computer core was dark and dead. Time disappeared. He worked through the night, the only sounds his breathing and the occasional metallic ping as the ship cooled. He used parts from his scrap pile, things that had no business working with alien technology but somehow did. A fuel pump housing from a Ford tractor fit almost perfectly over the cracked coupling. Copper wiring he'd salvaged from an old house bypass a melted junction. He was creating a hybrid, human ingenuity patching alien engineering. When the sky started turning gray with dawn, Grant heard movement behind him. He turned to find the alien woman standing at the edge of the crater, one hand braced against the dirt wall. She looked terrible, pale and shaking, but her gold eyes were alert and fixed on him with an expression he couldn't read. "What are you doing?" Her voice was stronger now, though still rough around the edges. Grant held up the wrench in his hand. "Fixing your ship. You need to get somewhere, right?" She stared at him like he'd just started speaking backwards. "You don't understand what you're working on. This technology is centuries beyond." "Probably," Grant interrupted, turning back to the ship. "But this coupling here is cracked, and that's why your thrust stabilizer is offline. Unless you want to spin like a top when you try to take off, you need it fixed. I might not understand the fancy stuff, but I understand broken things." She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No sound came out. She looked at the ship, then at the makeshift repairs he'd already made, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression, like she was seeing him for the first time. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "Grant Mitchell. I own this farm. You crashed into my cornfield." He pointed at the ship. "You got a name, or should I keep calling you the alien lady in my head?" She hesitated, and he could see her weighing something, making some kind of decision. Finally, she said, K. My name is K. Just K? No last name or title or anything. Just K. For now. Kay woke up the next morning to something she'd never experienced before. The smell of food being cooked by someone who actually seemed to enjoy cooking. It was sweet and buttery and warm, and it made her stomach growl loud enough that she pressed a hand against it, embarrassed even though nobody was around to hear. She'd spent the night on Grant's couch in the workshop, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like laundry detergent and something else, something earthy and comfortable. Her body still ached from the crash, but the silver blood had stopped flowing and the burns on her arms had started to heal. Her people recovered fast, faster than humans, but she still felt like she'd been thrown through a wall. Following the smell, she found herself standing in the doorway of Grant's kitchen. It was small and cluttered in a way that felt lived in rather than messy. There were drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, a calendar with appointments written in different colored pens, and a coffee maker that looked like it had survived at least 2 decades of heavy use. Grant stood at the stove, flipping golden circles in a pan with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Lily sat at the kitchen table, her hair still wild from sleep, chewing on a pencil while she stared at a worksheet covered in numbers. 7 times 8 is. Lily scrunched up her face, thinking hard. 56, Grant said without looking up from the stove. You know this one, kiddo. We practiced it last night. I know, but it's hard to remember when there's so many of them. That's why we practice. Hard things are worth doing. If it was easy, everyone would do it and it wouldn't matter as much. Kay stood frozen in the doorway, watching this scene that was so completely alien to her that it might as well have been happening on another planet. In the Velkan Empire, princesses didn't eat breakfast in kitchens. Food was brought to them by servants, presented on plates made of precious metals, eaten alone or with other royals while discussing politics and strategy. There was no warmth, no casual conversation, no father helping his daughter with schoolwork while making breakfast. Grant noticed her and smiled. It was an easy smile, friendly and open, with none of the calculation she was used to seeing in people's faces. Morning. You're looking better. How do you feel? Better. Thank you. The words felt awkward in her mouth. She wasn't used to thanking people for basic kindness. Good. You hungry? I'm making pancakes. He gestured to the stove with his spatula. I don't know what that is. Seriously. Lily looked up from her math worksheet, shocked. You don't have pancakes in space? We have nutrient paste. It provides everything the body needs. Lily made a face like she'd just bitten into something sour. That sounds terrible. It's efficient, Kay said, but even as she said it, she realized how sad that sounded. Efficient. Not delicious, not enjoyable, not something to look forward to. Just efficient. Grant slid 3 golden circles onto a plate and set it on the empty chair at the table. Sit. Try them. I promise they're better than nutrient paste. Kay sat slowly, feeling out of place in her damaged flight suit at this cheerful kitchen table. She picked up the fork, which felt too light and too simple compared to the utensils she was used to. She cut a small piece of pancake, watching the way it compressed under the fork, how steam rose from the inside. She brought it to her mouth hesitantly. The taste hit her like a physical force. Sweet but not too sweet, soft and fluffy, with a richness that made her close her eyes. It was warm and comforting and absolutely nothing like the cold efficiency of nutrient paste. She took another bite, then another, barely aware that she was eating faster. Good, right? Lily grinned at her, clearly pleased with Kay's reaction. Very good, Kay admitted, and it came out more emotional than she'd intended. She cleared her throat. What is it made from? Flour, eggs, milk, sugar, butter. Grant listed off as he poured more batter into the pan. Nothing fancy. Just basic stuff mixed together the right way. They ate together, and Grant started asking questions. Not the invasive kind she was used to, where people were fishing for political information or trying to figure out how to use her. Just normal questions. Where was she headed? Why was she traveling alone? Did she need to contact anyone to let them know she was okay? Kay found herself answering carefully, telling fragments of truth mixed with omissions. She was running from something. An arrangement she didn't want. People who thought they had the right to decide her entire future without asking what she wanted. Grant refilled his coffee and leaned back in his chair. Arranged marriage. Kay's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly. How did you know that? My sister went through something kind of like that. Different culture, different circumstances, but same basic problem. Family pressure, tradition, everyone telling her what she should do with her life. He shrugged like it was simple. She said no. Moved halfway across the country. Last I heard, she's doing great. Runs her own business, married someone she actually chose, has 2 kids. It's not that simple for me. Never is. But it's still your life, isn't it? Your choice to make. Those 2 words hit Kay harder than the crash had. Your choice. In 27 years of life as a Velkan princess, nobody had ever said that to her. Every decision had been weighed against what the empire needed, what the houses required, what political advantage could be gained. Her life was a game piece moved by other hands, and she'd accepted that because that's what princesses did. They sacrificed personal happiness for the greater good. But sitting in this small kitchen, eating pancakes made by a human mechanic who thought her choices should be her own, she felt something crack inside her chest. Something that had been holding tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Yeah, she said quietly, her voice rough. It should be my choice. After breakfast, Grant went back to work on her ship. Kay followed him, still unsteady on her feet but determined to see what he was doing. She'd expected him to be fumbling around, maybe making things worse with his primitive tools and limited understanding. What she found instead made her stop and stare. He'd made real progress. Significant progress. Problems that her ship's engineers had struggled with for weeks, Grant had solved using nothing but intuition and scrap parts. He treated the quantum flux manifold like it was a stubborn carburetor, tapping it gently and listening to the sound it made. When a power coupling sparked, he didn't panic or jump back. He just traced the energy flow with his fingers hovering over the conduit, feeling the heat distribution, then rerouted the connection through a piece of salvaged metal that had no business working but somehow did. You're solving problems my trained engineers couldn't crack, Kay said, unable to keep the amazement out of her voice. Grant looked up from where he was elbow deep in a junction box. Different perspective, I guess. Your engineers probably know too much. They see what the system is supposed to be, all the theory and design specs. I just see what it is right now, what's broken and what's working. Sometimes not knowing the rules helps you find solutions you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. It made sense in a way that frustrated her. The Velkan Empire prided itself on knowledge, on centuries of accumulated learning and technical expertise. Yet here was a human with none of that training, fixing her ship through nothing but practical experience and an innate understanding of how mechanical systems worked. That afternoon, while Grant worked and made notes on a pad of paper, Lily came out to the workshop with her sketchbook. She sat on an overturned bucket near Kay and started drawing, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. What are the stars like? Lily asked suddenly, not looking up from her drawing. Kay sat down next to her, grateful for the rest. Big. Beautiful. So many that you can't count them all even if you spent your whole life trying. Are there other kids on other planets? Yes. Lots of them. All different species, all different cultures. Do they go to school like me? Some do. Some learn different ways. Some species absorb knowledge directly from their parents through telepathy. Some learn by doing, apprenticing with masters of their craft. Lily's eyes went wide. That's so cool. Do they have moms and dads? The question hit Kay unexpectedly. She swallowed hard. Most do, yes. I don't have a mom anymore, Lily said it matter-of-factly, the way children sometimes do with devastating truths. She died when I was 4. I don't remember her much, just little bits. Dad says she's still in our hearts, watching over us. I'm sorry, Kay said softly. My mother died too. When I was young. I remember her, but not enough. Never enough. Lily looked up at her, and something passed between them. An understanding that needed no words. 2 people who'd lost their mothers, who carried that absence like a weight they'd learned to live with. Lily reached out and took Kay's hand, her small fingers wrapping around Kay's blue ones. They sat like that for a while, watching clouds drift across Earth's sky, so different from the violet clouds of Kay's home world. Lily went back to drawing, and Kay watched her create a picture of the spaceship with stick figures standing next to it. One blue, one tall and brown, one small and yellow. As the sun started to set, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and pink, Kay felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Simple, uncomplicated peace. No political maneuvering, no watching every word, no wondering who was trying to use her for their own gain. Just a man fixing her ship because it needed fixing, and a little girl sharing her drawings because she wanted to. That's when her communicator, lying on Grant's workbench, started screaming an emergency alert. Kay grabbed it, her heart suddenly pounding. The screen showed Vulcan military codes, encrypted but readable to someone with royal clearance. 3 scout ships had entered Earth's atmosphere. Their trajectory was direct and purposeful. They were heading straight for the farm. And behind them, broadcasting on the royal family's private frequency, was a ship she recognized immediately. The Warhammer. Her brother Theron's flagship. Her hands started shaking. She'd known they'd come looking eventually. She'd hoped for more time, just a few more days to figure out what to do, where to go next. But the Empire didn't work on hope. It worked on duty and obligation and the absolute certainty that princesses didn't get to run away. Grant noticed her expression and stood up, wiping grease from his hands. "What's wrong?" "They found me," Kay whispered. "My brother. He's coming." "When?" She checked the trajectory calculations. "They'll be here by dawn." Grant looked at the ship, at his daughter still drawing peacefully, at Kay standing there with terror written across her face. Then he did something Kay didn't expect. He smiled. Not a happy smile, but a determined one. The smile of a man who'd faced hard things before and knew he'd face them again. "Then we'd better finish these repairs tonight," he said. "And maybe figure out what you're going to tell your brother when he gets here." Kay stared at him. "You're not afraid?" "Terrified," Grant admitted. "But you needed help, and I said I'd help. I don't go back on my word. Besides, seems to me you've been running long enough. Maybe it's time to stand and fight instead." They came with the sunrise. Grant was on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the eastern sky when the first ship appeared. It didn't descend gradually like an airplane or helicopter. It just materialized, dropping through the clouds like a stone, then stopping dead in mid-air about 100 feet above his cornfield. The second ship appeared to the left, the third to the right. They formed a perfect triangle, boxing in the farm. The ships were nothing like Kay's elegant vessel. These were military craft, all sharp angles and dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As they settled into the field, the cornstalks underneath flattened with a sound like breaking bones. Grant watched months of work and income disappear under alien landing gear and felt his jaw tighten. Behind him, the screen door creaked. Lily came out in her pajamas, Mr. Trunk clutched tight against her chest. She'd always been a brave kid, but he could see her hands shaking. "Dad, what's happening?" "Stay behind me, baby. Whatever happens, you stay right behind me." Hatches opened on the ships with a hiss of pressurized air. Soldiers emerged, and Grant's breath caught in his throat. They were all Vulcan, he could see that much. The same blue skin as Kay, the same gold eyes. But these weren't scientists or explorers. These were warriors. They wore armor that did something impossible. It shifted, the surface rippling and changing color to match the surroundings. When they stepped onto the brown dirt, the armor turned earth-toned. When they passed the green crops, hints of green flickered across their chest plates. It was camouflage, but like nothing human military had ever dreamed up. Each soldier carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Not guns exactly, but something that made the air around them vibrate in a way that made Grant's teeth ache. Then the fourth ship arrived. It was bigger than the others, sleek where they were brutal, decorated where they were plain. It descended slowly, almost lazily, like it had all the time in the world and knew everyone would wait. The ship landed directly in the center of the triangle formed by the military vessels, and Grant felt the ground shake under his feet. The hatch opened. The soldiers immediately snapped to attention, fists pressed against their chests in synchronized salute. And Theron stepped out. He was massive, easily 7 feet tall, and every inch of him screamed royalty and power. His skin was the same pale blue as Case, but his hair was black as space itself, pulled back in intricate warrior's braids that Grant recognized from historical documentaries about ancient Earth cultures. He wore armor too, but his was ceremonial as much as functional. Silver inlaid with gold, with a cape that moved in a wind that didn't seem to exist anywhere else. On his head sat a crown. Not a simple circle of metal, but something alive. It pulsed within a light, stones embedded in the silver that glowed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Theron's gold eyes swept across the farm, taking in the modest house, the workshop, the battered pickup truck, and finally settled on Grant standing on the porch in jeans and a t-shirt that said "I turn wrenches, what's your superpower?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the morning birds, who didn't seem to realize that first contact between humans and an alien empire was happening in their territory. Then Theron's voice boomed out, deep and commanding, carrying across the field without any need for amplification. "Kay. Enough of this foolishness. Come home. Now." The workshop door opened. Kay emerged, and Grant barely recognized her. She changed out of her damaged flight suit into something she must have kept in her ship. Royal clothing, he realized. A uniform of deep purple with the same silver and gold inlay as her brother's armor. Her hair was braided now, pulled back in a style that matched Theron's. She looked every inch a princess. She walked toward her brother with her head held high, and Grant saw her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "I'm not going, Theron. You don't have a choice." Theron's voice was hard, but Grant could hear something underneath. Not quite concern, but not complete indifference either. "The wedding is in 3 cycles. The Crimson Alliance has already been signed. The Depth Lords are preparing their fleet. This marriage unites 4 great houses. It ends centuries of conflict." I said no. Theron's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Do you understand what you're saying? Do you comprehend the consequences? Without this alliance, the houses will go to war. Not skirmishes on border worlds. Real war. The kind that burns planets and kills billions. Is your personal happiness worth that price?" Kay flinched like he'd slapped her. Grant saw it, saw the way her certainty wavered, saw the weight of all those hypothetical deaths settle on her shoulders. And he couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Excuse me." Grant cleared his throat and stepped off the porch. Every soldier's weapon immediately tracked to him, humming louder. He ignored them and kept walking until he was standing between Kay and Theron. "Sorry to interrupt, but I think she made herself pretty clear." Theron looked down at him. Way down. Grant was 6 feet tall and felt like a child next to this alien prince. Theron's expression was somewhere between amused and contemptuous. "And who are you?" "Grant Mitchell. I own this farm." "Well, I own the mortgage on it anyway." He gestured at the flattened crops. "And your ship's just destroyed about $5,000 worth of corn, which I'm going to need compensation for." One of the soldiers stepped forward, hand moving toward his weapon. Theron raised a hand without looking, and the soldier froze. "A human." Theron said it like he was identifying an interesting insect. "You're hiding behind a human, Kay? This is what you've fallen to?" "I'm not hiding behind anyone," Kay snapped, moving to stand beside Grant. "I'm making my own choice. Something you've never let me do." "Choice?" Theron's laugh was cold and sharp as broken glass. "You think this is about choice? This is about responsibility. This is about duty. This is about preventing the deaths of billions of people. But please, explain to me how your desire to avoid an arranged marriage is more important than all those lives." Grant felt Kay beside him, felt her shaking, felt the guilt radiating off her in waves. And something in him snapped. He'd watched his wife die slowly over 2 years of cancer. He'd held her hand through chemo and radiation and watched the treatments fail. He'd learned what it meant to be powerless against impossible odds. And he'd learned that sometimes the only thing you could control was whether you faced those odds standing up or on your knees. "That's not fair," Grant said quietly. Theron turned those burning gold eyes on him. "Fair? What would you know about fair, primitive? You live on a backwater planet that hasn't even achieved faster-than-light travel. You have no concept of empire, of power, of the weight of ruling billions across hundreds of worlds." "You're right. I don't know anything about empires." Grant took a step forward. Behind him, he heard Lily gasp, but he didn't stop. "But I know bullying when I see it. You're using guilt to force your sister into something she doesn't want. You're putting the weight of all those hypothetical deaths on her shoulders when there's probably a dozen other ways to solve this problem. But those ways are harder, so you want the easy solution. Marry her off, problem solved, and you don't have to do any actual work." The soldiers around them tensed. Grant heard weapons powering up, felt the air pressure change in a way that made his survival instinct scream. But Theron just stared at him, his expression unreadable. "You dare," one of the soldiers started. "Let him speak," Theron interrupted, his eyes never leaving Grant's face. "I want to hear what this primitive thinks he understands about our situation." "I understand that real strength isn't forcing people to do what you want," Grant said. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, but he kept his voice steady. "Real strength is protecting people's right to make their own choices, even when those choices are hard. Even when they complicate your life. You want to use Kay as a chess piece, move her around the board to solve your political problems. But she's not a piece. She's a person. And she already told you no." The farm was silent except for the wind rustling through what was left of the corn. Theron's jaw was tight, his hands clenched. For a moment, Grant was absolutely certain he was about to be vaporized by alien weapons, and his only thought was whether Lily would be safe. Then Lily's small voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "Don't hurt my dad." Everyone turned. Lily had come down from the porch. She was standing in the middle of Grant's driveway, Mr. Trunk in one arm, the other pointing directly at Theron. She was 7 years old and barely 4 feet tall, facing down an alien prince and his army, and she wasn't backing down. "He's just trying to help," Lily continued, her voice shaking but determined. "That's what he does. He helps people. He helped your sister when she was hurt. He's fixing her ship. He gave her pancakes. And you're being mean to him for no reason." Theron stared at the small human child. Something shifted in his expression. The hardness cracked, just a little, and something almost like shame flickered across his face. Grant moved to stand in front of Lily, shielding her with his body. "Lily, go inside." "No, Dad. Somebody needs to tell him he's being a bully." Kay made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. She walked forward until she was standing next to Grant and Lily, forming a line between Theron and his soldiers. "This is what I choose," Kay said, and her voice was stronger now, steadier. "These humans. This farm. The right to make my own decisions. I won't be married off like property. I won't be used as a political tool anymore." Theron was quiet for a long time. He looked at his sister, at the human mechanic, at the small child clutching her stuffed elephant. Then he sighed, and suddenly he looked tired. Not like a prince or a warrior, just tired. "Father will never allow this," he said quietly. "Then I'll tell him myself. You don't understand what you're asking. If you refuse the marriage, you'll have to claim sovereignty through the trial of unity. Do you know what that means? I know it hasn't been attempted in 500 years. I know the last princess who tried died on the second trial. And you still want to do this?" Kay looked at Grant, at Lily. At the farm and the workshop and the half-repaired ship. At a life where she could choose to make pancakes and fix music boxes and be herself instead of a crown and a title. "Yes." Theron studied his sister for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. It was small and sad, but genuine. "You're braver than I gave you credit for." He turned to his soldiers. "Stand down. We're leaving." The soldiers exchanged confused looks but obeyed, weapons powering down. Theron walked toward his ship, then paused at the hatch. "Kay. If you're serious about this, send the formal challenge. Through proper channels. Give Father no excuse to ignore it or refuse." His gold eyes flicked to Grant. "And human. You have no idea what you've involved yourself in. But, thank you. For seeing my sister as a person instead of a princess." The ships lifted off one by one, their engines scorching the earth black. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving only burned crops and shocked silence behind. Grant let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His legs suddenly felt like water, and he sat down right there in his driveway. Lily immediately climbed into his lap, and he held her tight. Kay stood watching the sky, tears streaming down her blue cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Grant said. "Something tells me the hard part's just beginning." He had no idea how right he was. Kay confessed everything that night after Lily had gone to bed. She and Grant sat in his workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished repairs, and she told him the truth she'd been holding back. Her father wasn't just an emperor. He was a telepath. The most powerful one born to the Vulcan people in 3 generations. He could read minds from across a solar system, could sift through thoughts like pages in a book, could find secrets buried so deep people had forgotten they existed. And once he knew about Grant and Lily, once he understood that his daughter cared about these humans, he would use them. "He'll threaten you," Kay said, her voice hollow. "He'll make it clear that if I don't cooperate, you'll suffer. He won't kill you. That's too quick, too merciful. He'll just make your lives miserable in ways you can't imagine. And I'll have no choice but to give in, because I won't let you be hurt because of me." Grant sat there, turning a wrench over and over in his hands. He should be scared. He should tell her to leave, to take a ship and go far away and never come back. That was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. Instead, he asked, "What do you need?" Kay looked up, her gold eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "What? What do you need to beat this? To stand up to your father and actually win?" "I need to complete the trial of unity. 3 impossible tasks that prove I'm worthy to rule independently. It's ancient law, can't be refused if properly invoked. But Grant, nobody's succeeded in 500 years. The trials are designed to break you, To prove that individual ambition is nothing compared to the Empire's needs. Okay. So what are the trials? She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You're not listening. People die attempting these. I heard you. Now tell me what they are. Kay took a shaky breath. First is the Maze of Ancients. A quantum puzzle that exists in multiple dimensions. You have to navigate it using logic and instinct combined. Second is single combat against the Emperor's champion. Third. She paused. Third is the testimony. You need a champion of your own, someone who knows your true character, to speak for you before the great houses. To convince them you're worthy. Grant set down his wrench and looked at her directly. I'll do it. Do what? Be your champion. For the third trial. You don't understand what you're offering. If we fail, you don't just go home. My father will have complete authority over you. He could erase your memories of all this. He could take you away from Lily. He could make you forget she even exists. The thought of forgetting his daughter made Grant's blood run cold. But he looked at Kay, at this alien princess who'd learned to make pancakes to see a little girl smile, who'd spent hours fixing a cheap music box because it mattered to a child, and he knew what his answer had to be. Then we better not fail. They worked through the night making a plan. Kay would use Grant's old ham radio equipment to broadcast her formal challenge across the galaxy. Once that happened, there was no going back. The Empire would come, and they'd come with everything. Grant finished the last of the ship repairs while Kay rigged her communicator to his radio setup in the barn. It was a strange combination of technologies, decades-old Earth equipment jury-rigged to interface with devices that could transmit across light years. But it worked. That was the thing Grant was learning about technology. It didn't matter how advanced or primitive it was. If you understood what it was trying to do, you could make it work. As the sun set, Kay stood in front of the microphone. Her hands were shaking. This was it. The moment that would change everything. She looked at Grant, who gave her an encouraging nod, then at Lily, who was sitting on a hay bale watching with wide eyes. Kay took a deep breath and began speaking in her own language. The words were musical and strange, flowing together in ways English never could. Grant didn't understand them, but he could hear the power in them, the formality, the weight of ancient law being invoked. The broadcast lasted 3 minutes. When it ended, Kay slumped against the workbench, exhausted like she'd run a marathon. Now what? Grant asked. Now we wait. The challenge has to be acknowledged. My father has too. She never got to finish that sentence. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Grant's breath came out in visible puffs. The lights in the barn flickered, dimmed, then turned a strange purple color. And the air pressure changed, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. He's here, Kay whispered. Oh no. He's already here. A voice spoke, and it didn't come from any direction. It came from everywhere at once, from the air itself, deep and resonant and carrying an authority that made Grant's knees want to buckle. Daughter. The barn doors blew open even though there was no wind. Standing in the doorway, backlit by lights from a ship that hadn't been there seconds ago, was a figure that made Prince Theron look like a child playing dress-up. Emperor Velkoth was tall, taller even than his son, and ancient power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. His skin was the same pale blue, but marked with silver patterns that moved and shifted across his arms and face like living tattoos. His eyes blazed gold, so bright Grant had to look away. And the crown on his head wasn't metal at all. It was pure energy, crackling and pulsing, held in the shape of a crown by nothing but the Emperor's will. He stepped into the barn, and Grant felt it. A pressure against his mind, like someone pressing their hand against a door he didn't know he had. The Emperor was reading him, sifting through his thoughts with casual ease. Grant tried to fight it, tried to push back, but it was like trying to stop the ocean with his hands. Then, suddenly, the pressure was gone. Emperor Velkoth looked at him with an expression that might have been surprise. Interesting, the Emperor said in perfect English. Your mind is simple. But not weak. Clear, like still water. He turned to Kay. This is your champion? This human mechanic. Kay stepped forward, placing herself between Grant and her father. He is. And you can't refuse the challenge. I invoked it properly, with witnesses, following every protocol. I have no intention of refusing. Velkoth moved further into the barn, his presence somehow making the space feel smaller. But before I accept, I want to understand something. He looked at Grant again. Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know? Grant found his voice, though it came out rougher than he'd like. Because it's the right thing to do. The right thing. Velkoth repeated the words like they were foreign. I could offer you wealth. Technology that would transform your world. I could cure diseases, extend your lifespan, give you power you can't imagine. All I ask is that you convince my daughter to accept her duty. Is that not also the right thing? Billions of lives saved through one strategic marriage. No. No? The Emperor's eyebrow raised. Such certainty. Explain. Grant's heart was hammering, but he forced himself to meet those burning gold eyes. Because you're lying. Not about the war maybe, but about that being the only solution. You've got an empire spanning hundreds of worlds, thousands of smart people, and the best answer you can come up with is to sell your daughter like property? That's not strategy. That's taking the easy way out. The temperature dropped further. Frost formed on the metal tools hanging on the walls. Lily whimpered, and Grant moved to shield her without thinking. But Velkoth didn't attack. Instead, he laughed. It was a genuine sound, warm and surprised. You accuse an emperor of taking the easy path. The audacity. He turned to Kay. I see why you chose him. He has no concept of hierarchy or proper respect. Refreshing, in its way. Father, please. Velkoth raised a hand, silencing her. I will accept your challenge. The trial of unity will proceed. But understand the stakes, daughter. When you fail, and you will fail, they all do, you will marry Lord Dexter as planned. The alliance will be sealed. Peace will be maintained. And if she succeeds? Grant asked. The Emperor's smile was cold. Then she will have earned the right to rule her own territory, free from my control. But there is a condition for you, human. He stepped closer to Grant, looming over him. If you serve as her champion and fail, you will not remember any of this. Not the ships, not my daughter, not the trial. Your memory will be adjusted. You will return to your farm, to your life, and you will believe you spent these days doing nothing but fixing tractors. What about Lily? The child will remember nothing either. She is young. The memories will fade quickly. The thought of losing all of this, of forgetting Kay and the ship and the wonder of learning about the universe beyond Earth, made Grant feel sick. But the thought of Lily forgetting, of having her memories stolen, was worse. And if we succeed, he asked quietly, then you keep everything. Your memories, your freedom, your daughter's wonder at the stars. You will have earned it. Grant looked at Kay. She was shaking her head, mouthing no, please don't. He looked at Lily, who was watching him with complete trust that her dad would make the right choice. He thought about his wife, about the last thing she'd said to him before the cancer finally won. Teach Lily to be brave. Show her that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. Grant turned back to the Emperor and held out his hand. Deal. When do we start? Velkoth looked at the offered hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm and cold, and Grant felt that pressure against his mind again, the Emperor reading his sincerity, testing for deception, finding only stubborn determination. We start now, the Emperor said. Gather what you need. Both of you. We leave for the Celestial Throne immediately. Wait, Grant said. I need to make arrangements for Lily. Someone to watch her while we're gone. The child comes with us. Like hell she does. This is dangerous. I'm not risking my daughter. If you truly serve as champion, you must understand what you fight for. The child comes. She will be protected, you have my word. But she will witness the trials. Velkoth's expression softened slightly. Besides, your daughter seems to have a gift for speaking uncomfortable truths to royalty. That might prove useful. 2 hours later, they stood in the landing bay of the Celestial Throne, the Emperor's flagship. It was massive, a city floating in space, with corridors that stretched for miles and windows showing Earth hanging in the void like a blue marble. Lily held Grant's hand tight, her eyes huge as she watched aliens from a dozen species walk past. Kay stood beside them, back in her royal armor, looking every inch a princess but holding herself like someone heading to war. The first trial begins at dawn, Velkoth said. Rest. Prepare yourselves. And human? He looked at Grant. I hope you understand what you've committed to. For both your sakes. As they were led to their quarters, Grant realized he'd just bet everything he had, his memories, his daughter's childhood, his entire sense of reality, on helping an alien princess claim her freedom. He also realized he didn't regret it one bit. The first trial started at dawn, which didn't mean much in space but apparently mattered to ancient Velkan tradition. Grant and Lily watched from an observation deck while Kay entered the Maze of Ancients, a structure that hurt to look at directly. It existed in multiple dimensions at once, its walls shifting and phasing through realities Grant couldn't begin to understand. Lily pressed her face against the viewport. Is she going to be okay, Dad? I hope so, baby. They watched Kay navigate impossible geometry, making choices that seemed random but must have followed some internal logic. Sometimes she'd walk through walls that shouldn't have existed. Sometimes she'd turn back from paths that looked clear. It took 3 hours, and Grant's heart didn't stop pounding the entire time. When Kay finally emerged from the maze's center, holding a crystal that pulsed with inner light, the assembled crowd of alien nobility erupted in surprised murmurs. The first trial in 500 years, and she'd actually completed it. 1 down. 2 to go. The second trial happened the next day in an arena that could hold 50,000 spectators. Every seat was full. Apparently, watching a princess potentially die in ritual combat was popular entertainment across the empire. Kay's opponent was a warrior named Draknor, the emperor's personal champion. He was massive, covered in natural armor plating, with 4 arms that each held a different weapon. He'd fought in 1,000 battles and never lost. Grant watched from a private box with Lily and Emperor Velkoth. The emperor sat like a statue, his face unreadable, but Grant could see the tension in his shoulders. Whatever else was true, Velkoth cared what happened to his daughter. The fight was brutal. Draknor had strength and experience. Kay had speed and desperation. He'd swing with enough force to crack stone, and she'd slip aside at the last possible second. She couldn't match his power, so she didn't try. Instead, she used his momentum against him, letting his attacks overextend, striking at joints in his armor, staying mobile. It lasted 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. In the end, Kay won not through overwhelming force but through exhaustion. She wore him down, stayed just out of reach, made him chase her until his movements got sloppy. When he finally left an opening, she took it, placing her blade against his throat in the ritual position of surrender. The arena exploded with noise. Draknor bowed to her, showing respect, and Kay barely managed to stay standing long enough to accept it before collapsing. 2 down. 1 to go. They gave her 2 days to recover. Grant spent the time exploring the ship with Lily, meeting aliens from across the Empire, and trying not to think about what was coming. The third trial. His trial. On the morning of the final test, Grant stood in front of a mirror in his quarters, wearing the same jeans and flannel shirt he'd worn on the farm. He'd been offered formal clothes, fancy robes that would make him look more appropriate. He'd refused. If he was going to speak for Kay, he was going to do it as himself. Lily adjusted his collar, very serious. You're going to do great, Dad. How do you know? Because you always tell the truth, even when it's hard. That's what Mom said about you. She said you couldn't lie to save your life. Grant smiled despite his nerves. Your mom was right about that. The conclave chamber was even more impressive than he'd remembered from the brief glimpse before. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species filled the tiered seats, all watching the center stage where Grant would have to stand. At the chamber's heart sat the 4 House Lords on thrones that seemed carved from solidified starlight. Lord Vex of House Crimson was a being made of living flame, his form constantly shifting and crackling. Lady Moira of House Depths looked almost human except her skin was translucent, showing a network of glowing lines beneath like circuits or veins. High Chancellor Drex of House Stone was a mountain given life, massive and ancient, his skin like granite. Priestess Yana of House Wind was barely visible, more like a suggestion of a person than a solid form, her voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. Emperor Velkoth sat on a throne above them all, watching with those burning gold eyes. Grant walked to the center of the chamber. Spotlights found him, making him feel even more exposed. His shadow stretched across the polished floor for what felt like miles. Thousands of eyes watched him. Thousands of beings who'd lived centuries, who commanded technologies and powers he couldn't imagine, all waiting to hear what this human mechanic from Kansas had to say. Lord Vex spoke first, his voice crackling like a bonfire. Grant Mitchell of Earth. You stand as champion for Princess Kay, claiming she is worthy to rule. This is your opportunity to convince us. Speak, and choose your words carefully. They will determine her fate and yours. Grant's mouth was dry. His hands were shaking, so he shoved them in his pockets. He'd prepared a speech, practiced what he wanted to say, but standing here with all these eyes on him, the practiced words evaporated. So he just told the truth. I'm not good with fancy speeches, he started. Back home, I fix things. Tractors, cars, farm equipment. I'm good at it because I understand how things work, how all the pieces fit together. And people aren't that different from machines, really. They're all made of parts that have to work together. Lady Moira's voice flowed like deep water. You compare people to machines? How crude. Maybe. But hear me out. Machines break down when you force parts to do things they weren't designed for. You put too much pressure on one component, ignore maintenance, treat pieces like they're disposable. That's when everything falls apart. He took a breath. That's what you were doing to Kay. Trying to force her into a role she wasn't built for, treating her like a tool instead of a person. High Chancellor Drex rumbled like distant thunder. She is a princess. She has responsibilities, obligations. Personal desires are secondary to the Empire's needs. Are they? Grant asked. Because from where I'm standing, that's a pretty good way to build resentment and rebellion. You want to know why Kay ran? Not because she's selfish or irresponsible. She ran because nobody ever asked her what she wanted. Not once in 27 years did anyone treat her like her thoughts and feelings mattered. And you did. Priestess Yana's whisper came from all directions. In what, a few days? You presume to understand her better than those who raised her. No. I don't understand her better. But I listen to her. That's the difference. Grant felt himself getting more confident now, the words coming easier. You know what she did while staying at my farm? She fixed my daughter's music box. Nobody asked her to. Lily had left it on my workbench, and Kay just picked it up and spent an hour figuring out how earth mechanics worked so she could repair it. Then she didn't even tell Lily about it. She just left it on her pillow for her to find. A music box, Lord Vex said dismissively. This is what you offer as proof of leadership. Yeah. A music box. Grant's voice grew stronger. Because that tells me more about who Kay is than any political alliance. She could have ignored it. She could have seen it as beneath her. She's a princess who probably has servants for everything back home. But she saw something broken and she fixed it, not for recognition or reward, but because it would make a kid happy. That's empathy. That's seeing people as people, not as assets or tools or problems to solve. The chamber had gone quiet. Even the background murmur of thousands of voices had faded. Grant continued. You want to know if she's worthy to rule? I watched her make pancakes because my daughter asked about them. I watched her sit in the dirt and tell Lily about the stars, not lecturing, just sharing. I watched her choose to risk everything rather than be sold off like property. And yeah, that last one? That scared her. She knew there'd be consequences. She knew people might get hurt. But she also knew that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's terrifying. Pretty words, Lady Moira said, but her tone was less hostile now. But we require more than sentiment. The houses were on the brink of war. Her marriage would have prevented that. How does her personal freedom outweigh billions of lives? This was the hard part. Grant had been dreading this question. He looked up at Emperor Velkoth, who watched him with an unreadable expression. It doesn't, Grant said simply. If her marriage was truly the only way to prevent war, then yeah, billions of lives would matter more. But that's not true, is it? He looked at each of the House Lords in turn. You've got an empire spanning hundreds of worlds. You've got technology that looks like magic to us. You've got thousands of brilliant minds and centuries of accumulated knowledge. And the best solution you could come up with was to force two people into a loveless marriage? That wasn't strategy. That was laziness disguised as tradition. The chamber erupted in shocked gasps. Several aliens stood up, shouting. Grant had just called the Empire's leadership lazy in front of everyone. Emperor Velkoth raised his hand and silence fell instantly. Continue, was all he said, but there was something in his voice. Not anger. Something else. Grant swallowed hard. I think the real test wasn't whether Kay would accept the marriage. It was whether she'd fight for herself. Whether she had the strength to stand up to the most powerful people in the galaxy and say no, there's a better way. And she did. She passed that test when she ran. She passed it again when she sent that challenge. And if you give her the chance, she'll find solutions to your problems that don't require anyone to sacrifice their happiness. Priestess Yana spoke, her voice thoughtful now. You have great faith in someone you barely know. I have faith in people who do the right thing even when it's hard. Kay could have gone through with the marriage. It would have been easier. Safer. But she chose the hard right over the easy wrong. That's the kind of person I want making decisions that affect billions of lives. Someone who'll look for the difficult solution that respects everyone's humanity instead of the simple solution that treats people like chess pieces. High Chancellor Drex leaned forward on his throne. And what of you, human? What do you gain from this? Grant smiled sadly. If we fail? I lose everything. My memories of all this, my daughter's wonder at the stars, maybe even the memory of my daughter herself. If we succeed? I get to keep those memories and know I helped someone who deserved help. That's all. Lord Vex's flames flickered. You risk your very identity for no material gain. For doing what's right. That's not no gain. That's everything. The four House Lords looked at each other, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, they turned to Emperor Velkoth. The Emperor stood, and every being in the chamber held their breath. I have sat on this throne for 300 years, Velkoth said, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive space. I have heard 1,000 testimonies, witnessed countless trials, judged the worthiness of hundreds who sought power. And I have never heard anything quite like this. He looked at Grant. A human mechanic, risking everything, asking for nothing, speaking truth to power with no concept of the danger he's in. It's either the bravest thing I've seen or the most foolish. Probably both, Grant admitted. Velkoth's lips twitched. Almost a smile. My daughter has completed the trials. She navigated the impossible maze. She defeated my champion in combat. And through this human's eyes, we see what perhaps we should have seen long ago. She is not a tool. She is not a bargaining chip. She is a person who deserves the right to choose her own path. He turned to face the assembled nobility. I acknowledge case completion of the trial of unity. She has proven her worthiness through skill, strength, and character. However, he paused, and Grant's heart sank. Before I grant sovereignty, I have a confession to make. Kay, standing at the edge of the chamber, went very still. There was never a true arranged marriage, Velkoth continued. Lord Dexter and I arranged the appearance of one, yes, but it was a test. Your mother, before she died, made me promise that no child of ours would be forced into the same loveless political union we endured. She wanted you to choose your own path. But I needed to know you were strong enough to claim it. The chamber exploded with noise. Kay stood frozen, her face cycling through shock, anger, relief, and confusion. You let me think, her voice cracked. You let me believe I was destroying everything. I let you believe your choice had consequences. Because it did. Just not the ones you thought. Velkoth descended from his throne, walking to his daughter. You needed to prove you would fight for yourself. That you wouldn't simply accept your fate because it was easier. Your mother knew that real strength comes from standing up for what you believe, even against impossible odds. Especially against impossible odds. A young Velkan lord stepped forward from the crowd. Grant recognized him from briefings as Lord Dexter, the supposed groom. He bowed to Kay with a grin. For what it's worth, I never wanted a forced marriage either. My father thought it would be good for my character or some nonsense. I'm just glad we can both choose our own futures now. No hard feelings. Kay looked like she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You all knew? The House Lords knew. It was part of the test. Velkoth placed a hand on her shoulder. You passed, daughter. You always had sovereignty. You just had to believe you deserved it. The chamber erupted in applause that shook the walls. Kay stood there, overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face. Velkoth raised his hand for silence. Princess Kay, I grant you sovereignty over the Outer Reach territories. Build the empire you believe in. Rule as you see fit. You've earned that right. 3 months later, Grant stood on a balcony overlooking an ocean that sparkled purple under twin moons. The view never got old, no matter how many times he saw it. Behind him, Kay's palace rose into the sky, but it wasn't like the cold fortresses of the empire. She designed it herself, all glass and open spaces, built as much as a university as a home. The sound of children's laughter echoed off crystal walls. Grant turned to see Lily racing down a corridor, chasing 3 alien kids who'd become her best friends. She was learning 3 languages, studying xenobiology, and yesterday she'd asked if she could learn to pilot a shuttle. She was happy in a way he hadn't seen since her mother died, alive with wonder and possibility. Kay joined him at the railing, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She'd become addicted to Earth coffee and had it imported specially. She handed him one and they stood together in comfortable silence. Your farm? She asked eventually. Neighbors taking care of it. Though I think I'm officially done with farming. Oh? Career change. Got a job offer. Chief engineering consultant to a certain princess. Apparently, she needs someone to solve impossible problems with duct tape and stubbornness. Kay laughed. The pay is terrible. Yeah, but the benefits are pretty good. He gestured at the view, at the palace, at Lily's distant laughter. Can't complain. They watched the sunset paint the alien sky in colors Earth had never seen. Purple and gold and something that was almost green but not quite. Thank you, Kay said quietly. For everything. For seeing me as just, me. Not a princess or a political tool or anything else. Just Kay. Grant smiled. That's all you needed to be. Down below, workers were hanging a banner across the university's main entrance. It rippled in a breeze that smelled like the ocean and something sweet. The text was written in both Vulcan script and English, Kay's first official decree as sovereign ruler. The right to choose one's path is the foundation of all power. Lily came running back, breathless and excited, Mr. Trunk somehow still clutched under one arm despite all the running. Dad. Kay. They're starting a flight school and they said I could join when I turn 8. Can I? Please? Grant looked at Kay, who shrugged with a grin that said this was his call. He looked at his daughter, practically vibrating with excitement, her eyes full of stars and dreams and possibilities he'd never imagined back on the farm. Yeah, kiddo. You can learn to fly. Lily shrieked with joy and hugged them both before racing off to tell her friends. Grant watched her go, this little girl who'd stood up to an emperor, who'd crossed the galaxy, who'd grown up seeing aliens and spaceships as normal parts of life. Her mother would have loved this. Would have loved seeing their daughter so happy, so brave, so full of wonder. Above them, ships came and went from 100 worlds, bringing students and teachers, traders and explorers. Below them, the purple ocean sang against crystal shores. And on a balcony between Earth and stars, a mechanic, his daughter, and a princess who chose herself watched the future unfold. It wasn't the life Grant had planned. It wasn't the quiet farm existence he'd imagined. It was so much better. Somewhere in the palace, an alien child's toy broke. Kay would probably fix it later, just like she'd fixed Lily's music box, because that's who she was. A princess who understood that leadership wasn't about power or control. It was about seeing people who needed help and choosing to help them, whether they were your subjects or just kids with broken toys. And Grant would probably help her fix it, because that's what he did. He fixed broken things. He just never imagined the broken thing that needed fixing would be an entire empire's understanding of what it meant to choose your own path. But here they were. And it was good. It was really, really good.